So I just got back from seeing the Alto Knights in theaters, and if you're new to this channel, we do honest reviews. I'm not doing any crazy edits or clickbait to try to make you stay or watch. This is just me telling you guys like it is and if this movie is worth watching. I'll be going through different parts of the movie, saying what was good, what was bad, and giving my final ranking at the end of the video. If you like this type of normal content, consider subscribing. Here's how I'd describe this movie in one sentence. Imagine Goodfellas, but without any of the classic scenes that make Goodfellas Goodfellas. So you don't get the funny how scenes or Tommy getting whacked or just the classic I'm gonna get the papers lines. Now you may ask me then, so how can this movie be good? And what I'll tell you is even if you take away those scenes from Goodfellas, you'd still have an entertaining and interesting story. It just wouldn't be one of the best movies ever made anymore. That's how I describe the Alto Knights. It's good and is an interesting story about Frank Costello and Vito Genovese, who were the two biggest mob bosses in New York in the 1950s. Both of the characters are played by Robert De Niro, which while watching I couldn't tell if that was a good thing or not. But after finishing the movie, these are my final thoughts on that decision. Regardless of what you think politically about De Niro, these type of movies are his bread and butter. He does a great job, and as he plays both the leads for the movie, he carries the film. However, I do think this movie would have been better if he got one of his buddies like Pacino or Pesci to play the other role. I think if I had to choose, I'd keep De Niro as Vito and replace the character of Frank. And I also think the amount of money it cost them to do the VFX of putting two De Niros in the scene could have went to paying another actor. But like I said, De Niro still does a great job with it. He narrates throughout the whole movie, which almost seems standard for a good mob movie, and it keeps you interested in what's going to happen to these characters at the end. Although you already know with these type of stories that they either go to jail or die. But anyway, around 25 minutes into the movie, we meet Vito's wife, which any Sopranos fans will recognize as Artie's wife. She's great in the movie for the short time she's in, honestly perfect casting for her role, but again, there's not that classic like wedding scene that you would get in Goodfellas. It's just like one shot of them eating their wedding cake in the movie. Again, it's just not that type of movie. The first great scene in my opinion, and by the way there aren't many what I'd describe great scenes, was the Keefe overhearings where Congress tried to get all these guys in for a deposition. They all pleaded the fifth except for Frank, and it makes for a great scene that you could actually look up the real life footage for after you see the movie, which is always cool to see for me. The movie continues with the feud between Frank and Vito, and it's interesting but nothing crazy. I will say though, this movie is close to dragging, but it doesn't drag. There's slower parts to the movie for sure, but it's nothing too egregious. Now before I get into the end of the movie and my overall thoughts, I want to talk about Barry Levinson's directing. I would give him an above average score for this film. It's got some good shots, but nothing too unique. He does a great job making you feel the time period of the movie, but in terms of cinematography, there's nothing too special. And just as a side note, the way I view cinematography is not just how good it looks. Most movies and TV shows can and do look good. They use the right lenses and equipment and have the budget to make it look expensive. But I judge cinematography by how intentional a director is with their composition and how stylistic their visuals are. So while this movie did look good, it wasn't anything special stylistically for me, except I enjoyed the parts where it cuts to the old black and white footage. I thought they did a good job with that, but I don't know how much of that I'd really consider cinematography. Anyway, this movie probably would have been better if it was directed by Martin Scorsese, but that's neither here nor there. Another sequence though that I enjoyed is when Frank tries to send Albert to Cuba to have him avoid the grand jury. It's a little predictable at that moment that Albert's gonna die, as this is right in the middle of the feud with Vito and Frank, but it's still a very intense and suspenseful moment. I thought they did a great job with that barbershop scene. The climax of the movie you can say was uneventful because it's just a meeting of all the mob bosses and nothing quote-unquote exciting happens, but it just wasn't that type of movie. And I think if you understand that it wasn't that type of movie, you, like me, will be satisfied with the ending. It's a cool little story on how the FBI and the public eventually found out that organized crime was a nationwide thing, and it was all because of this feud between these two guys. It was also funny at the end, we get the classic people getting arrested montage cliche that we always get from like Scorsese crazy. So overall, I think this movie was good. De Niro gave a really good performance, and like I said, he did the best he could with there being two of him, but I think it would have benefited from having another actor there. There were some funny parts of good dialogue, but nothing too special or iconic like you get in something like Goodfellas. What I will say is this movie was just what it was. It was just a mob boss story that's 2 hours long, and I liked that choice. So while I don't think this was the greatest crime movie ever made, I'd say it's definitely worth a theater visit. I'm giving this a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and if you guys are curious, you could check out my letterbox, but let me know in the comments your rating and what you thought, and we could talk.